As a business owner, you're familiar and you have a company culture, but do you have a family culture? Well, do you know that your business stability is directly proportional to your family and life stability? Well, that's what our expert is here to discuss with us today. And he's going to give you all the tips and hacks on how to really build that great foundation in your family and personal life so that you can dominate as a business owner. Welcome to Waist Up Wardrobe. I'm Christine Vartanian, an attorney turned personal style expert and image consultant. As the founder of Jade House of Style, I am passionate about unveiling the inner confidence of my clients by developing their personal style and dressing them for success. But is getting dressed up still important in our virtual world? Well, that's where my experience can help with what I call Waist Up Wardrobe. Waist Up Wardrobe is a podcast for all things you need to conduct an outstanding Zoom meeting. It's about how to dress for the camera, but it's not just about the clothes. It's about everything you need to know to show up on brand and professionally for the camera. Join me in the Waist Up Wardrobe studio to discuss how to navigate this virtual world and dominate from behind the desk. Good morning, Waist Up Wardrobe Nation. It's great to have you here for yet another episode of Waist Up Wardrobe. I'm so thrilled and excited to bring you a new, fresh show every single time. And today we're always focused on entrepreneurship, and today's topic might just resonate with so many of us. And we're always trying to be the best entrepreneur we can be the best and improve ourselves on a daily basis, because that's kind of what the entrepreneurial world is all about. So I can't wait to dive in onto this conversation with my guest today. But before I get started, I want to remind you that we are on so many platforms where you can catch us. We're on iTunes, so you can go and listen to us if you're taking a walk on the beach and can't necessarily watch us. We are on Facebook every Thursday at 11:30 live, where you can actually have a live conversation with us and the experts. We are also on YouTube, and we are here religiously, consistently every Thursday, like I said earlier. I also want to give a huge thank you and shout out to my awesome producer, Rick Moscoso, who makes this show possible. There he is, showing up in his avatar, but he's always here in the production room, making everything really just work smoothly, and I'm so grateful for his contribution. So I always have to remember to highlight him, because he is the wind beneath the wings of this show. So, okay, so now let me brag about my guest. Aaron Shelley is my guest today, and he has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and is an MBA. He has worked with small businesses and startups where he's developed a unique set of systems where perspective on business, that show perspective on business and family. I totally butchered that, but he'll clarify when he gets on. His work in the academic and business worlds led him to understand how related our families and business dynamics are and how those two intertwine. He and his wife have run the largest Irish dance school in Utah for over 20 years, which I'm so excited to ask him about. He has built multiple companies, consulted across multiple industries, and helped raise $54 million as the COO of a technology company. He lives in Utah currently with his wife and his 4 children. Please help me welcome Aaron Shelley to the show. Hi, Aaron. How are you?
I'm doing great, Christine. It's good opportunity. I'm looking forward to this. It should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, the show is supposed to be fun, but it also is supposed to be informative. But what is the better way to learn, right? By having fun.
Yep. That's how kids learn. That's how you try to develop games and all these things. It's how do you make learning fun? And the better you do, the more people learn without thinking they're learning.
I mean, I think we can quote that, because that's exactly right. It's about kind of learning being sort of the collateral effect, because you're actually having so much fun. It's kind of that cornerstone of entrepreneurship, right? When you do something you love, it doesn't feel like work. Same idea.
Yeah, and I think it's sometimes when you see the challenges, I think if you program your brain and kind of think of these as these are the opportunities for me to learn, then you're looking at this challenge not as, oh my gosh, I have another problem. You're looking at it like this is another opportunity for me to learn and overcome something. I mean, like if you're in the gym, you're always like, I'm lifting more weight. And I think the same can be applied if we just tweak our perspective a little bit on the challenges of business.
Absolutely. You're like speaking my language, I will say. Okay, Aaron, we do this thing at the beginning of the show where we want to get to know our guest a little bit. So I'm gonna ask you some like personal questions, not deeply personal, but just like things about who you are and what you do and so forth. And they're just this or that questions, and just tell me what comes to mind right away. Okay.
All right.
Dancing or hiking?
Probably hiking. I just went dancing yesterday.
Wow. Well, I am surprised by the answer because I wanted to dig deep into your Irish dancing background.
I don't have an Irish dancing background myself. My wife does. She's done it for 30 years or whatever since she was a small kid. She taught at a university and all this stuff. So, I mean, I love the dancing side, but for me personally, and I did country dancing yesterday, but just yeah, generally I've done a lot more hiking. I'm in Utah, so we hike like we have 5 national parks that are phenomenal, and I live on the foothills, so we go do that all the time. So I love
Yeah.
hiking, love the outdoors.
Well, there you go. I just learned a new thing about you that is in addition to your bio. That the idea of Irish dancing seems so different, and I just was so curious about that. But it is the way that you support your wife. It sounds like, yeah,
Mhm.
no, that's amazing. And if you were to pick a sport that you would love to like excel at, what would that be?
Volleyball. I mean,
Why?
I do well. I play it all the time. It's just there's always people better, and I'm like, oh, I'm just getting into I'm older. I just remember I have my son who's 20. I used to play with him, and he's just so much better. And I'm like, if I could be better, I could
Well,
learn get better than you at things.
I know when your kids start getting better at things better than you, it gets a little bit interesting, right? But I think that when you play with people who are better, you get better, right?
Yep, I
Yeah.
know. It's a lot of fun, but yeah, I play it every week, and so I'm just like constantly reminded about how I'm not as good as I was and how I wish I was better.
Yeah. Well, I think that we're always trying to improve as business owners and people who are high achievers. Okay, I have one more question. What is that sport where you throw a spear?
The javelin,
Yeah, did you ever do that?
I did that in high school. Yep, went to state, had a lot of fun. A
Yeah.
lot of close calls where you're like, that was a foot away from my foot. So yeah, a lot
So
of
it
fun
can be
things.
dangerous.
Oh yeah, that's why I don't think they do it in. I don't even know if they do it in Utah anymore. I know it wasn't available in most of the bigger states. California had it. There's all the safety things out there. So my wife grew up in California. She's like, we didn't have that. I'm like, yeah, you wouldn't.
Not in California. No.
Got to
We're
be
very safe.
safer.
We're a very safe state.
Uh-huh.
Risks. Yeah. All right. Well, it's a pleasure to have you, a pleasure to get to know you. And I just want to start really talking about the topic that I was so intrigued by when I was looking at, what you've done and what you continue to do. And one of the things that you have made that you believe, and that is kind of a foundation of the work that you do, is that your personal journey, your personal life, your family life is sort of the foundation, and that it is directly proportional to how well you do in business. So, can you elaborate on that idea a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at this, I don't see there's not this big difference between business and family. There's not this like families are run super differently and a business is run a different way. We're all making the same decisions. We have money, we have resources, we're trying to optimize for certain outcomes. And so I think if you're taking your business and you're saying, no, we don't want to have any of these family elements, like love and caring for each other and those type of things in a business, then you miss something. Just like in a family, if you're like, well, we're not going to think about money and we're not going to budget and we're not, well, then you have very bad outcomes on the family side. And so I think that the rules that govern each one, there's massive overlap. And I think sometimes people will get caught up. Well, I don't want my family to be run like a business. Like, why? Like in a business, you can't be a total a-hole usually to all the people involved, even if you're the CEO, because people will just quit. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes people will be like, well, who's the CEO of the family? And usually it's one of the couple, but you're like, but that doesn't mean you treat the other people badly. If anything, you're trying to keep them involved and keep them happy. You don't want your employees and your other partners to be in a bad space. So that's where I think there's a lot of people have kind of tried to separate it, but I look at it much more closely. And I think, frankly, this new generation and the way they perceive business is really trying to blend it much more.
Yeah. Well, and you make a good point because, as we talk about millennials and what they want out of life, they really are looking to target more of a work-life balance, right? They talk about that a lot. And just the way the world is working now in terms of, the conveniences, being able to work from home virtually and all those things really have facilitated sort of like not separating family and business. And so there are pros and cons to that. But I totally agree with what you're saying. When I talk about company culture when it comes to business, because a lot of the work that I do with branding involves a part of how do you really create a company culture that is meaningful, that keeps people wanting to be invested in your business. And a lot of it has to do with how treating them like you care about them, treating them like you care about their dreams so that they will care about your dreams. So I've talked about it in that way. I've never really talked about it in the way that we're talking about it today, where, you run your home like you're the CEO of your house, right? Of your household. And so a lot of those principles when it comes to finances and entertainment and all the things that you would do in your business and company there are parallels in your family life. So I really think it's so cool that we're kind of framing it and like, because people know a lot of these concepts, but when you define it, when you have a clear vision of how that is, it actually maybe might help you work towards the goals better, don't you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, your goals should be not just in one sphere either, right? I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, it's not, I want to build my business and I don't care about my family for the next 10 years, or I care about my family and I'm going to neglect my business for the next. It's always trying to find a balance. There's always these trade-offs. So I think it's a lot about trying to understand those trade-offs and making the right trade-offs based on what you're trying to accomplish.
Right.
Right. And then a lot of times I do think people make a trade off, and I think it's a poor one, which is I'm going to not focus on my relationship with my spouse and my children, and I'm going to try to build the business.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that, 10-year period, you might be a successful entrepreneur and your wife or your husband hates you and your kids hate you. And you're like, well, I didn't balance that very well. And
Yeah.
then you sit there and go like, why am I even working? Why do I even want all this money? Like, what's the point of having it all? It's not just because I want it. It's you're usually going back to what's for the people I love. And
Right.
so it's this interesting place. If you over focus in an area, like it's just like in a business, if you over focusing on marketing and sales and you're not focusing on your product, then a lot of people will churn out of your business. And
Yeah.
so it's really trying to keep your product and sales kind of at an even spot and investing in both. And so it's a little bit of balancing the growth of your business. If you don't, and I've seen that where you just have this sales organization that's getting all the sales and then everyone churns out and you're like, it's just the leaky bucket syndrome. The same thing applies in our family where we got to really have good relationships because at the end, if we don't have them, what was the point of of doing it all anyway?
I know. That's exactly right. Why you say that marriages shouldn't be 50-50? What does that mean?
I don't know that a business, if you think about a business, it's not 50-50. If you and I went into business, or you talk about you have your, your Rick who's helping you out, you're sitting there like, I want people to be 100%. Like in essence, the equity of a family is always 50-50, unless you have a prenup or something. And at that point, if you're like, well, you need to do 50% of the editing, and then he needs to do 50% of the interviewing, it doesn't even make sense. You're like, no, we specialize. And so I think in a family, it's like, I'm out, at one point, I'm up on the roof. It's a rainy night and our house is leaking and I'm trying to tarp it up so that we don't have this leak in our house. How do I 50-50 that with my wife? Like, I legitimately don't want her on the roof because I don't want her to get hurt because I want to protect her. Is that worth like 10 times of her loading the dishwasher? Like, this whole like keeping tabs on things, we don't do it in business. If you're in sales and I'm in marketing, we appreciate each other. We understand how related we are and that my job helps you and your job helps me. We realize the synergies and we don't sit there and go like, but it's not fair. And that's why I say when people get into this kind of quid pro quo, I get this, you get this, instead of saying what's best for the business, then you have problems. So it's got to be 100. I mean, imagine if you interviewed someone and they said, I will give you 50%. You would say, I'm not hiring you immediately.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, like, when you go into a job, it's 100%. When you go into a relationship, it should be 100%. It shouldn't be this, hey, but you're getting slightly more. You spent $100 on this thing. I need to spend $100 on my thing. It just, why? If that's not the best thing for the family, why are you doing it?
Right. It's not about keeping score, right? I mean, especially when you're in relationships, whether it's a business relationship or a family relationship, you have a symbiotic relationship. It's more, like you said, each person has a specialty. For instance, when my children were young, my husband and I decided I stay home with the kids to rear them, and it was my job. And he was
Mhm.
the provider, and he continued to be for a long time. But it wasn't and I think it goes back to like this stay-at-home moms being like the most under appreciated business ever, right? There's a lot of work that goes into that not a lot of people want to do. So there is that sort of give and take, that you're not doing exactly the same thing, but you're doing equally important things. It's kind of like a car, right? An engine needs a piston, and it needs, I don't know what else, a motor. It can't run without one or the other, but they're not exactly the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I use the term complementary because I'm like, you want to have this complementary skill set. Just like if you and I were going into a business, we want someone who's the face of the company, like you currently are, and then we want someone in the backside. And they're different jobs in the family. And I break up the resources so that people can see this. If you look at a family, you have financial resources, you have social resources, and you have human resources. And those social resources, that's a lot of the serving and investing. And what you find is, I think women who are the stay-at-home moms traditionally were doing a lot of the social resources. I would say in a company, that's like your sales and marketing, right? And it's hard. Everyone knows that you can never put a value on a brand. Like we put it on a balance sheet, but no one knows what the actual, down to the last number, the value of Nike is, right? But we kind of put it on a balance sheet to say, well, it's okay. We don't know the value of PR. There's so many things in marketing we don't know the value of. And so sometimes we under index for them. We go, oh, sales is more important than marketing because they're the ones making the money, and PR, we don't know what they're doing. But then if you cut that off, then all of a sudden sales is like, well, I don't have the leads and it's harder for me to work. So this is the balance you see in the financial world, in the business world we have to deal with. And we have the same thing at home. I mean, if you look at when you're a stay-at-home mom, I think this is where I've broken it down. I'm like, the mom is really playing the HR department role. She is a therapist for her children, right? When the kids come home, she's trying to help them process it. She's usually also helping in the community, serving in the school, developing all these connections. And what I've seen is that's just like the sales and marketing of a business. And a lot of times now you have people who are like, oh, we're in this relationship and both of us are going to work full time. And then you go, why are kids having mental health issues? Why does our community feel so detached? Why do we feel all lonely? Well, because no one's investing in it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. It's really, really true. I heard someone once say that the most important business partner you choose is your spouse. Do you have, I just, it was, do you have a thought on that, or have you ever heard that term?
I've heard it and I completely agree with it. I have an idea that I talk about sometimes from a weird perspective where I say, don't you want to hire a spouse? Like if you look at when you're hiring someone, you're thinking, what is the job description that I want them to do? And what am I offering to them as kind of the other side? And what is the cultural values that they need to be part of? Like if you try to put together a job description for a company, you're very thoughtful about what it is. Whereas I think a lot of people now are not in this hiring thought of, well, I'm trying to find someone who's going to be a good partner for me. Like I think Donald Trump, his spouse he needed a very different spouse, or a president, like Obama. Any of these people who are high profile, they needed a different spouse than I needed because they needed more of a socialite. And they probably wanted someone who was more connected in some of these upper echelons, So you look at these things and you're like, you don't need the same partner. Just like in business, If you are a startup, you don't need the same CTO as you need if you're Google.
Yeah.
So it's really looking and saying, where am I? What is my culture? What is my needs? What is my strategy? And who do I need to be successful? And then looking through people from that sphere, because we all know there's amazing people out there, but you're kind of like, I couldn't work with them, or they're not the right people for our company right now. And it's the same thing in a marital relationship where you're like, yeah, this is an amazing person, but it's not the amazing person that I need for my life. And so
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit more about, I mean, and we say this in the business world, the worst mistake you ever make is hiring the wrong people, wrong
Right.
person. And it's the same in your family. Like the worst mistake you ever make is marrying the wrong person because you have such a financial loss. Well, just all your resources can be challenged when you have that breakup.
Yeah. Yeah. The another thing you talk about a lot is the family business model. Did we already touch on that, or can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, so the business model as I talk about it is the engine that fuels and creates resources, right? So if you look at Google, they have a strategy that is to organize the world's data, or that's what it was at one point. And their structure was we're going to be a very flat organization. And then their last piece of the business model was their culture. And they had a culture of freedom. Like, if you work the best at 2 a.m., you work at 2 a.m. So that's their business model. And their mission was, well, what do? We buy more data centers, we hire more engineers. So it's very clear what they do with their resources. Now you compare that to Walmart. Walmart's strategy is to, provide families with reasonably, good, I don't remember what it was, reasonable, good stuff at a good price, I think is what it was. That's their mission. Then their structure is you have to be very hierarchical. You have to be at the right place. At the right time. Their culture was, if you don't show up on time, you're fired. It's not about being creative and you want to do your best work at 2 a.m. Cool. We don't want to hire you. So their business model was vastly different from Google's.
Yeah.
And yet both of these companies are multi-billion-dollar companies and super successful. So a business model is your mission, your structure, and your culture aligned. And that is your business model that's making the decisions for what to do with your time, your money, and your relationships.
Yeah, it's like it resonates in the same way that like your core values. What are your core values as a company?
Mhm.
And your core values are different perhaps than a different company. If your core values are that people have a free schedule, something that is a little bit loose, then that is what you create. But if it's more, you have to be stringent, a little bit more structured, then that's different. But like you gave the two examples, very both very successful. It just depends on what your core values are. And I see the parallel in families, right? What are the core values of a certain family? What are the values they live by? And those are the things that attract people to each other in terms of, when they're looking for a spouse, is like, really, do we have the important values in common or not? Then, that um, you know, perhaps predicts how successful a family will be. Uh, I think that I think it's really cool to kind of have I understand this idea that if you can run your family like on a business model, and that's not being unemotional about it, it's just being thoughtful actually and intentional about how the success you want to reach and the dreams you want to build within the family unit for each of the individuals, and also to think about businesses in terms of family, right? I think when you do both of those things, you kind of have sort of the practical piece in each model in your business and in your home, but you also have that sort of human piece, right? So I think that's so interesting in the way that you explain that. And you talked a lot about homemakers. I had a question here about homemakers and their social investments, and I know you talked about that because, see, I started my business as a tribute to women who stayed home with their children because I felt as though they tended to sacrifice themselves the way that they showed up, excuse me, in an effort to excuse me, to sacrifice for the family, to sacrifice for all the things that they do, all the hats that they wear in and out of the home, for the community, for the school, but I also didn't agree that you need to sacrifice yourself to do all those things, that you could do all those things and still manage yourself and take care of yourself as a woman, right? So this whole idea about homemakers and their social investments, those are the kind of those invisible things, right? That the invisible actions, those things that happen in between the lines that nobody knows about. But where do you see it? You see it in the success of the children, you see it in the people that they become, you see it in the humans they become and what they contribute to the world. And I don't think people I don't think our world necessarily gives enough credit to that role. So I think it's really cool that you think about it in that way. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the easiest part of the reason I wrote the book is because I was reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I love his stuff. Right, it really showed me the flywheel as it relates to finances. Right, you have assets; those assets produce money. You use that money, or that they produce income. You use the cash flow then to buy more assets. That's like this basic flywheel. But then as you expand that, I noticed in my own relationship, there were things when you just focus on finance. Like at one point, I made an investment in real estate in 2007, right before 2008 hit, which was this great decline, and lost $250,000. And I noticed I lost money, but my mental health also got screwed, right? I was in this state of, I'm supposed to be a provider and I'm supposed to be this great, provide for my family. And
Yeah.
now I'm like an unprovider, like I've done the opposite. And I was like, my wife would be better off with someone else, right? I'm sucking at this job. And, going through that experience, I would have, if I'd not had the social connections, or if my wife had been like, yeah, you suck, I'm out, it would have been bad. But instead, we kind of went through that. So I think there's that element of there's not just the finances. And if we focus on that, we're in trouble. But there's a story of Mary Gates, Bill Gates' mother, that I like to tell, where she got a degree. She was a teacher. She married her husband, who's a lawyer. And then she had 3 children, then exited the workforce. She invested in her kids, and then she started to serve in the community. Once her kids were a little older, she served on the board of University of Washington, and then she served on the board of United Way. Those are what I would call social connections. Well, happens that the board of United Way also contained the CEO of IBM. That was one of the premier or greatest connections for Bill Gates. And
Mm.
that was with IBM and Microsoft. That could have been a $200 billion connection that she did because she was investing in social relationships.
Yeah.
Again, this is what I'm talking about. If we're only focused on the finances, she had been like, well, my kids are out, I'm going back to school, I'm making my $30,000, $40,000 a year. Her family would have been much worse off because she was essentially ignoring the opportunity to do this social investing. And that's where I think if people can understand the social investing and human resource investing, then they look at the wife who's staying home. They're like, thank you for investing in the human resources of our family. You're investing in our health. In fact, that's why most married men do better in the workforce. They make more money because their wife is helping them and taking care of their health, which most men suck at taking care of our own health, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is where I see this example of social resources and social investing of Mary Gates had massive returns, and yet no one would have looked at those and said, oh, this is going to be phenomenal. This is what she should be doing.
It's amazing. That example is like such a powerful example of what I was saying, and that is that those things that maybe nobody else would realize happened and that led to that promise or opportunity. It's like you don't know the missed opportunity, right? If you don't work for it. It's this sort of nebulous, invisible thing. But that, and maybe that's why they say that behind every successful man there's a woman. And I know that doesn't necessarily always work out that way, because men also support women in multiple ways. But it's sort of that support that you get that is invisible, that nobody knows about, but that leads to things that are great. So I love that you really highlight sort of that social investment, because it's not always about the one churning out the money, right? There's so many other things that go into the success of an organization or a family.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's the same way if you go into almost all companies, the sales guys are the sexy ones, right? Because
Yeah.
they're the ones that bring in the money. Oh, I just closed this deal. Oh, I'm so great. And you're like, cool, but we're the ones who built the thing you're selling, And we're the ones who have to support the customers that you just sold to. So if you guys think you're all that and a bag of chips and you think you want to act like a-holes, then we can just exit this thing, right? It's the same thing where people, if you don't appreciate, the developers who build this product and they're like interacting with computers. And as a salesperson, I could be like, that's phenomenal. I'm so glad you like to play with computers because I like to not do that. I like to interact with humans. And then you can say that salespeople can look at the developers and say, I'm so glad you exist. And the developers can say the same thing because they don't want to interact with humans. So they're like, I'm so glad you do your job. It's this great complementary system in a business. And if those things get out of whack and the sales guys get this heavy heads and, oh, I'm so great, then all of a sudden it deteriorates. And you see the same thing happens in marriages when, oh, my wife's doing all this and I'm doing this. And I think the money I'm bringing in is more important. Okay. Then your wife will probably be like, screw you, right? Or vice versa. If the wife's like, well, the thing I'm doing is most important. You need to come home from work and you need to do all these jobs. What do you mean? I just spent 10 hours busting my butt. I need to relax, right? It needs to be a mutual respect for each other. And neither one is more important necessarily than the other. They're both equally important. And it's really when we start to weigh each other, kind of back to that 50-50 thing and be like, well, how much is $1,000 of income versus, it just gets stupid, right? We're both in this together. We should be focused on the family and our needs being met in the family, not necessarily, well, what about mine as an individual?
Yeah. It, so this brings up a question that maybe not kind of on my script, but it takes two people to tango, right? It takes two people to be committed to this model. And one can only be in control of their own self. So say you were dealing with, or you had a couple that was talking to you, but you recognize that one of them may not be that 100. One of them is 100% invested. The other one's 50%, thinking, the tit for tat. How would you advise that couple? And, any thoughts on that additional, because that can happen.
Oh, for sure. I would say an early part of this would be structural. If you look in a business, we have regular meetings to keep on the same trajectory and to stay aligned, right? Because we understand that product and sales, they kind of drift off, and maybe product built something and sales doesn't know how to sell it. And so then they're not getting the value out of it. So in a business, we constantly have these meetings, weekly meetings, usually with executives, quarterly meetings with the team, annual plannings, and all those things. If you look at them, it's trying to keep everyone in the company aligned and motivated. And so you see in our own families, rarely do I see families that are doing weekly, quarterly, and annual plannings.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, then what are you happening over time? You're getting unaligned. So to me, whenever you're talking with a couple, I may be like, I'm 100% in because I want to build this business for the next 10 years. And my wife might be like, this happened a little bit. I mean, for us, my wife's like, but I really want to take our kids on a trip to Austria because her family's from Austria. That's where her dad grew up. I want our whole family to go there. And I'm like, okay, we have to figure out how to make some trade-offs here. But what are our overall goals? What's our overall strategy we're both playing to? And then we can make those trade-offs. And so I ended up taking consulting jobs and staying kind of free so that I could take a month trip with my family and my wife, because that was what was important to her. So I think it's this constant coming back together, because we're constantly, as entrepreneurs especially, we're constantly learning. We're constantly growing. We want this. And if your spouse is not constantly learning and growing, then you get out of alignment.
Yeah.
And so I think it's much more about these regular structured things that are trying to maintain alignment. And in a marriage, there's the sexual needs, there's the financial needs, there's the raising of the kids, and those things change over time. Like the demands when you have a baby are different than when it's a 5-year-old, are different when you have teenagers.
Yeah.
And then are different when all your kids are out of the house. So there's kind of these phases. And I think if people don't plan on the phases, and then don't realize those phases are going to change, then they end up with some issues because they're like, well, all the kids are out of the house. And the guy's like, well, if he's working, he's like, I just keep doing my thing. And the wife's like, but what the freak do I do? Because I used to spend 60 hours a week with these freaking kids. Now I have this whole time freed up.
Yeah.
So I think there's those challenges, but a lot of it's just getting that alignment and getting back to a place. And if you're not in alignment, then you may need to either try to get back, but if you can't, then you may need to separate.
Yeah. It's interesting. You look at like family, it's like a team, right? It's like a team. And it's like any team, like a football team, if one of the players is kind of focused on themselves and not and being the star and not playing as a team, it takes the team down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a lot like that. It's like working as a team. It's like it really is very fascinating, just the basic principles that apply in life. Just going back to the basics, right? Back to the basics. The basic family structure, the basic business structure, what's important, culture, team, social, entertainment, finances, all those basic things. You got that same model in all aspects of your life. So, um even like you said at the top of the show, even your fitness, right? I believe that when you go into the gym to work out, it's like however you work out at the gym is like how you act in real life, because it's sort of that value system, the way you think, the way you work. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a gym, but whatever activity you do to stay healthy. So like it's back to the basics. It's like not that complicated. It's just working as a team, and sort of the basic things that every part and module of your life needs is the same thing, just a different team.
Yeah. I mean, I look at like, I agree with your basics. If you look at most companies I've been with, they're like one-on-ones are very important with all of your subordinates, right? And regular meetings with the executive team or with your co-founders are really important. Well, do we do those with our kids?
Yeah.
Do we do those with our spouse? What type of structure do we have? Because most people, if you talk about meetings, they're like, I totally hate meetings. They're so boring. I wish I didn't have to be in, because there's usually a little bit of over meetings. But then I've experimented, and you take away meetings, and then everyone's like, I don't know what's going on. I feel like I have no communication.
Yeah.
And so it needs to be a balance of those things. And that's where I think a lot of times you need to have some way of staying in touch with your spouse and staying in touch with your children. You need to have some way of staying in touch with your children, with your employees, with your founders. And if you don't do those things, over time, you will see drift. And then and if you ignore it for years and years, you see massive drift. And then you're like, it's like an airplane. They always talk about how airplanes are always off course by a degree or two, and they're constantly kind of trying to stay on course and have to readjust. It's the same thing with any business. It's the same thing with any relationship. You always have to realign. And sometimes your spouse may be like, well, I've changed what I want to do. I want to try this. All right. Well, if we're totally changing our business strategy, do I still want to be involved? Like, how are we going to make this work?
Yeah.
And so that's where I just think there's a lot of logistics and a lot of smaller things that people ignore. And then it comes up to, they're like, well, my business didn't work out. Well, like if you're talking about marketing, were you posting on social media regularly? Were you emailing? Were you doing this on a regular basis? Well, no, I did it once.
Yeah.
Okay. Duh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's doing all the things. It's doing all the things and staying consistent with it. It's not just doing them, but being consistent. And same goes with business, same goes with family. So fascinating. Erin, this conversation is like so basic. It's so essential. Essential is the better word, to really being able to map out success to your goals, whether you're in your business or in your family unit. And we always wrap up with sort of a summary of the show. If people were listening just to the end of the show and they want to get just a summary, a recap, what is the one takeaway that you would like people to have remembered from this conversation?
The biggest thing I think would be the concept of social resources in a family and in a business, but especially the family, and investing in those. Because if you look at a lot of things, if you start to look at your social resources and then you look at things like moving, I moved. All of a sudden, all those people I invested in, those are now cut off. Maybe I still have a little bit on social media, but all those relationships are gone. Maybe I should value that more when every time I consider moving, rather than just going, well, I'm going to make more money, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to move. So it's really trying to look at your social resources and say, am I investing in them? Am I using them. I mean, my job at my last company was a friend who I'd known for 13 years. We were in the same church. We just talked about business, and then came an opportunity. So he was like, hey, you want to come work with us? So the more that we understand social resources and invest in them, I think we'll have the Bill Gates scenario, like with his mom, where you start to see exponential returns. Whereas if you ignore it, I think you're going to get just linear returns, and you're going to end up probably fairly lonely and screwed up, frankly.
Well, that is very profound, and I think everybody's going to give that some thought, because I mean, I think that even though we're simplifying this, it really is such, and we talk about this being essential and foundational. These are the foundations of life, right? The social piece, the financial piece, all those things. So, if you do you have a tip or two to leave the audience with?
On social resources, a tip I would say, do service.
Oh,
Service, in most cases, if you serve in the arts community, you usually have wealthy people that you can be connected with. And those, not that you're trying to necessarily look at all these resources and exploit them, but it's like, as soon as you're going and servicing, if it's in the arts, if it's in a church, if it's in a sports group, you start to build up those social relationships, and it's not for money. And I think so much right now we've over indexed on money, and it's just hurting us in so many ways.
yeah. That is actually so aligned with a basic cornerstone of entrepreneurship, which is giving, being a go-giver, right? Giving, 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 and then things happen. They just happen. They come to you, right? How about a tool? Is there a tool the audience can utilize to help them kind of think through this concept?
Yeah, so I have on my website, thefamilyflywheel.com, I have some book resources there, and they'll help you go through and identify all your resources, as well as identify your business model. If you're married, I would advise doing it separately and then bringing them together and being like, what's our culture? What's your culture? Are we aligned, or do we have some friction? Because those are the things that are going to cause the most friction in your relationships, whether it's business or family. Very useful to go through that exercise separately and then bring them together to look for any friction areas.
Yeah. Well, with the hashtag FamBizAndShine, if people are listening to this on the replay or live, you put in that hashtag, we will actually get you that link and make it really easy for you guys to get it. Thank you for that tool, Aaron. And the hashtag is hashtag FamBizAndShine. Let's put people right into action. Let's say somebody's listening to this and they're like, I'm convinced I got to do something. What would be that one action item they can do, so that something easy that doesn't require a lot, that they can do to get started?
I mean, I would probably say go through those resources, look at what resources you really have.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say, look into your look into your network of friends, family, whatever, and find people you think are successful, and try to connect to them, not from a standpoint of, I want something from you monetarily, because most of the time that's rebuffed heavily.
Yeah.
I do the same, but more from the standpoint of, I want to understand what you did and how you did it. Because I think in almost all cases, I've seen very successful people, they love to help people who are trying to help themselves. They just hate people, or hate trying to help people who are just looking for handouts.
Oh, of course. Yeah. That's sort of the cornerstone of, just being a go-giver, not thinking about what it is in it for you, really just kind of giving. But I think a great action item would be to set up a meeting. Like go set up your company meeting right now, or your family meeting right now, and kind of like start setting a cadence for that. Because like, whether it's monthly or weekly or quarterly, whatever, but have that consistency. So that's what I got out of it as my action item.
That's good as well. I will say, trying to do some things as a business, like weekly, like really structured goal meetings, that tended not to work very well. It seems like on a monthly basis, just trying to keep having a touch point, and then a quarterly planning is really useful.
Yeah. We want manageable goals so they actually get done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Aaron, it was wonderful having you on the show today. Thank you so much for enriching us with your experience and knowledge, and just this great idea that, we get back to the basics, the foundation of life, really, the foundation for our business is similar to what the foundation for our family structure should be, and really applying that. It's a good way. It's a great rule of thumb. Makes it easy. It makes it easy to think about and plan, right?
That was my goal. So
Yeah.
thanks a lot, Christine. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you so much. There you have it, Waist Up Wardrobe Nation, episode on how your family and your business structures are quite similar, just, just in different teams. So, thank you for being here and watching this episode. A comment in the comments. Let us know what you think and what you thought of this episode. And you know that we're going to be here next week at the same time, live at 11:30. It was great having you. Thank you so much. It's like a conversation that really resonates with me personally because I think of things in those terms. So really awesome.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I agree. It seems like all the entrepreneurs I talk about, they're like, yep, 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 yep. And some of it's like, I should be thinking about that. I should have done that. I do all this stuff in the one sphere. I just haven't taken it to the other.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, in our businesses, we build out like a vision, a big picture vision. Like, I mean, I have my kids plan out their big picture visions like from a young age. Like one of my kids, to the point where one of my kids, we have our church regular that we're attached to, and my youngest, which I'd never heard this before, I told him, so what should we put on your vision plan, right? And he's like, I want to make it into heaven. I'm like, oh, okay. I never even thought about putting that on my big picture vision. So it's so fun. You can get into heads of your kids that way. My oldest is 22, my youngest is 12, and then I have 15 and 18 in the middle. So, you said, do you have your oldest is 20?
No, well, it's 22, 20, 18, 16.
Okay. Yeah. So a little bit kind of similar. I have a much younger 12-year-old, but life with four, right? Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I'm really looking like my daughter's going to be a senior this year. So now it's, the empty nest is coming. What do those transitions look like? And
that's the best part. That's the best part. That's the part where you and your wife will get to do all the things that you've launched them, right?
yeah, I look at it maybe different. I'm like, my kids, they become so fun. Like I spent all this time training them, and now I'm like, and it's fun to interact with them. Like with my son to play volleyball, it's so much fun now. I'm like, oh, you're crushing it. And then he's like, no, I gotta go.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh. So I think there's a point for me. I don't know. I think a lot of it especially for men is like, how do I invest in the family? And there was a lot of stuff where I looked at it. I think most men are like, I invest in the family by doing my job.
Yeah.
And they didn't spend enough time investing in the kids. And so they didn't maybe tighten those relationships up the same way. And that's where I've seen it. I've kind of gone the other way. Like I've gone scuba diving with my kids. I've done skiing with my kids. We've done it all together as a family. So it's really like going through these experiences. And there's some of the books that I've seen that have like pushed that. Like, here's what the dad needs to do. So I've tried to pull the kids into the stuff that I want to do rather than getting pulled into all their stuff. So all my kids played volleyball with me. We've all skied. We've all mountain biked. We've all done these things. So I think if you look at it in one way, I think you can actually make for a really successful kids and family.
Yeah. No, and also a very enriched life. I mean, that's the kind of the beauty of it, right? But I think that each season of life is, like you said, it takes, there's transitions. But I also think that when each parent keeps their eye on the family, I think that's where true success happens because you end up investing in your relationship with your kids and your husband, all those things. So it's really powerful. So um, Rick, I'm sure has something to say about this. Rick, come on down.
Where's the behind the scenes guy?
Me? What?
He likes to see behind the scenes, but we want to hear his perspective
About what? Which one?
about family.
Oh, well, I have to agree with Aaron because there must be something in the air, huh, Christine?
Yeah.
God. So I have a 30-year-old and a 27-year-old daughter, and then a 15-year-old son. So there's a bit of a gap, right?
Mhm.
And I worked in corporate America for 25 years. Yeah, a little over 25 years, and I missed a lot of those little things, right, with the girls early on because I was so focused on the job and providing and just trying to be successful and all those different things. And so when Dylan came along 15 years ago, I had an opportunity to step away and kind of reevaluate things because I wasn't, back then I wasn't thinking that I'd ever get a second chance. So I just plowed ahead. And all of a sudden it hit us, when Dylan was born, that now here's your second chance. Don't mess it up. Right. And so I pulled away from corporate and I'm still doing the things that I used to do, but now as my own business. Right. And it's, I made a commitment to myself, number one, as well as to my wife, that I wasn't going to miss the little things. I wasn't going to miss the the middle school graduations or the elementary graduations or any of those little things that we have to endure as parents. And it's given me a much better perspective and created a much stronger relationship with my son because I focused on that. Right.
Yeah. No, it's yeah, it's great when like you really think of your family as sort of you keep that eye focused on the family. And everybody goes through different times, right? Like you were saying, Aaron, like sometimes in business you focus on, PR, but then you forget that you have to have sales. So it's really sometimes it really is about maybe not doing as much in a certain area and then recognizing and being aware, oh, oops, I'm dropping the ball in this area and kind of getting back to it. So because people aren't perfect, we're human. Things, we make mistakes, we don't see it clearly sometimes. And so it's just the idea of being aware and constantly working to be better, right?
Yeah, well, one of the weird areas that I saw was like there seems to be these roles of a challenger and a nurturer in most families. And
Uh-huh,
it's not always the man or the woman. In my family, I tend to be the challenger, my wife's the nurturer.
uh-huh.
And it seems like if you miss out on one of those roles, you either get over challenged, where then you hate to do things, or you get over nurtured, where you're overprotected from everything.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of these places where, and in the book, The Boy Crisis, it talks about how a lot of men, they play with their kids, but they play with them on the edge of their skills. Like, oh, let's go play basketball. And if my kid's trying, I'm going to loosen up and let him be successful. But if he starts to slack off, then I'm going to start to shut him down. Like there's kind of this give and take with a lot of guys where they play with them, but it's kind of like, it's developmental play. So men are trying to play, or the challenger is trying to play with them on the edge of their skills. And they talked about how a lot of men, like it was funny because I saw this, like the men will sing nursery rhymes wrong to their kids. Like my wife will sing the thing exactly right every time, but I'll sing it, tweak the words a little bit every time, and the kids will be like, what? So there's kind of this curiosity that a lot of times men or the challenger person will keep in their kids that kind of pushes them intellectually and pushes them physically and spiritually. So that's one of the roles that if you see and I don't know what your experience was, Rick, but that's what I've seen with some of the kids and that's really where men bond with their kids, is when their kids are having problems. So that's where I've seen some of that happen.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I found myself early on kind of doing that when he was younger, and I didn't want to crush him. I'm a golfer and he was in flag football and stuff like that, right? And so we would throw around, and I'd actually challenge him a little bit throwing the baseball around and throwing the football around and throw it a little harder than what he would expect, during a normal game and all that stuff. And then got to the point where he just finished his freshman year. But about a year ago, he was learning how to play volleyball. And I noticed that, okay, we're going to do something that's going to help your reaction time to the ball. And so I put him on, we started going to the racquetball court at our local YMCA's. And so we were playing racquetball, and, I kind of let him get used to it. And then I started playing like I normally play, like against other players, right? Just to force him to really start reacting to the ball and the action off the wall and all that stuff. And then he actually started getting pretty good. And then last April I was playing with him, and he started getting really competitive. Right. And he hit one in the front wall, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to let that thing drop. And so I just, I went driving for it in the front corner, reached out as far as I could, and I kissed the wall with my head.
Oh.
And I believe I ended up getting a slight concussion. I mean, I didn't lose my, I didn't get cloudy vision or, dizziness or anything like that, but I had this big old goose egg. 2 weeks later, I find out, because I'm so competitive, with him, I found out, my shoulder started reducing movement. I go, what the heck is going on here? And my wife's in the medical industry. And so we looked at it under ultrasound, and the right side looked great. Left side, there was like a ton of fluid. All the tendons were thickened, and it's like, holy cow. Well, and I shoved it off and thought, it's just tendonitis. I'll just take some anti-inflams. No problem. So another 2 weeks later, I could hardly move it. It was painful. And so I ended up, getting an MR and find out I tore my rotator cuff and labrum. Just because I didn't want him to win.
Well, this whole thing about really scaffolding the kids, right? You kind of, it's like a give and take, a tug and pull, right? You want them to feel successful, but at the same time, like I've told my kids when we play games together, I'm like, just because I'm your mom, I'm not going to let you win.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to kind of give them some, you want to be a little bit in certain times, like give them a little, right? So it's very interesting. It's sort of the scaffolding. And I don't know, I feel like sometimes some parents can be both the nurturer and the challenger.
It can be. I'm not saying it. It's just sometimes it's hard if the kid comes to you as, I need nurturing right now. And then you're like, get up. What's your problem? Yeah. So there's all these, and it's the same thing. If you're challenging and they're nurturing and then they need a challenge, it's just sometimes hard to weigh both of those. And we all do that individually. I've just noticed with myself, like the reason I wanted my kids to go scuba diving is because I'm like, it's a mental thing when you're like you're getting in the water and you're going through this and you're like, I have to obey these rules. These aren't the arbitrary parent rules, these are the real rules.
Or you die.
Or you die.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of these places of how do you push your kids' limits? And that's what I personally love is like when you, like certain movies, I feel like The Matrix was one of these, like, open my brain, like, wow, that's a totally different way of looking at it. So it's kind of these, like, how do you give them experiences that change their worldview?
Yeah.
And their ideas about themselves. Like, that's where you want to build them. I mean, as I see it, there's this belief like the world is a terrible place. And then you go, so you either need to protect them from it or you need to prepare them for it. Right. And it's either you're going to make them strong so they can deal with it, or you're going to protect them. And if you protect them, then at some point that protection's going to go away and they're going to be exposed to reality. Mm-hmm. And so it's always, to me, like, how do you keep them challenged? And to your point, Rick, like, you want to keep them on their edge.
Yeah.
But you don't want to go off your edge.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's interesting because he has I put him in front of a lot of people that that I know, specifically airline captains, right, that fly commercially for the couple of the big carriers. And he's also a Cub Scout, or sorry, a Boy Scout, and one of the merit badges is aviation. So I said, hey, listen, I know these guys. Let me see if I can set up a flight for you, right? A discovery flight. And so happens to be the son of one of the airline captains is a CFI, right? He's a certified flight instructor. So I took him out to the airport, and I said, he's really good at video games, right? So hand-eye coordination is really good, but feeling it is totally different. And he started getting a little nervous about it. And I said, listen, He's not going to put you in danger. You just follow procedure, because it's all about procedure. Because if you don't follow procedure, you're going to crash, and you don't want to crash. So follow the procedure, and he will never put you in a situation where you're going to be in danger. And if something gets squirrely or goes sideways, he's always right there to take control, you know. And so he had such a good experience, but it was all about procedure. And I love that. I put him up in the plane like that, because now he understands, you know, he can't just go to the end of the goal. He's got to follow these specific things and steps in order to get to where he wants to go. And so now he has this huge interest in become a pilot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wonderful. That's
Mhm.
great. That's the piece that you were talking about, building in those social things. So
Yep.
thank you, Aaron. We've taken up too much of your time, but it was wonderful conversation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was great meeting both of you.
Thank
You
you.
too, Aaron.
We'll see ya.
All right. We'll see you soon.
Okay. That was
All
a
right.
good conversation.
Yeah, that was good.
Uh,
Good. You want to do a speedy
Let me do it
recap?
quickly. I have to go pick up Giselle, but yes. Let's see. It was,
Are they still in school?
no, everybody's out except for Isabel.
Mm.
Hold on one second. Okay. All right. Let me do the speedy recap quickly.
Okay. Hey, let me ask you real quick. You know, when I don't know if you're seeing a lag when I start the video, but is there a lag after you stop speaking to when the main intro starts?
I'm not seeing that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, here you
That's how I
go. And
start these things. It's been a while.
all right, when you're ready.
Yeah, okay. So I know as an entrepreneur, you have a business culture, but do you have a family culture? Did you know that your family life is directly oh wait, business stability. Okay, I'm gonna start over again. As a business owner, you have a company culture, but do you have a family culture that is ingrained in your family structure? Did you know that the stability of your business is directly proportional to the stability of your family unit and your life? Well, in this episode, we talk about exactly that with our guests so that you can also build in a stable family structure that impacts your business structure.
That's good.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay. In episode 137 of Waist Up Wardrobe, you have a business culture, but you also have a family culture. We discuss the Waist Up Wardrobe weekly wrap up, and here it is in a nutshell. The main takeaway is that our guest emphasizes how important it is to increase your social outreach and to become. I'm going to start over again. Social. Let's see. See. Social investments. Okay. In episode 137 of Waist Up Wardrobe, you have a business culture, but you also have a family culture. In this episode of Waist Up Wardrobe, the basic. Okay. In episode 137 of Waist Up Wardrobe, you have a business culture, but you also have a family culture. In the Waist Up Wardrobe weekly wrap up, in a nutshell, boils down to this. The main takeaway that our guest emphasizes is building in social investments in your family structure and your business structure. So it's important to network and to create social investments, because those social investments that you get while you're doing community service or volunteering at your church or volunteering at different organizations will build a network for you and your family members, so that will give you opportunities that maybe you just don't know about today. Some tips. Do service in the community and in other organizations around you, because that helps you build these social investments. What was the tool he gave? It's called what? family flywheel or something?
It is, what did I do? Oh, here, let's see. It is, here it is, thefamilyflywheel.com/book resources.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. The tool that the tool that Aaron Shelley, our guest, the tool that our guest offered is the flywheel. Oh gosh, is it the familyflywheel.com/book resources?
Yes.
Okay. The tool that our guest told us about from his website is called thefamilyflywheel.com/family resources. And you want to look that up because he gives you a
No,
whole
no. It's /book resources.
book resources. Okay. Familyflywheel.
Thefamilyflywheel.com
Book resources.
/book resources.
Our guest gave us this free downloadable. Our guest offered this tool off of his website, and it's called thefamilyflywheel.com/book resources. And if you go there and you look that up, you will get sort of an idea of how to start building in those family steps that really get you to a success level that you can. I'll start over again. Our guest on this episode offered us a tool. It's called thefamilyflywheel.com/book resources. And if you look that up, you'll get some tools on how to get started building in your family culture and your business culture, because they both inform each other. And finally, action item. Well, I've decided family meetings as well as those company meetings are really critical. So I'm going to go and start scheduling those on a monthly basis. I suggest you try it too.
Okay.
Okay, good. I got to go. I have to go pick up Giselle. She's waiting for me.
Okay.